The NFC North may be the best division in all of football, and hell, it might have been as well last year. This may be a start of a dominant run for the NFC North, where they continually have 2 to 3 playoff teams in the playoffs for the next half decade, and I wouldn't be surprised. Hell, they did that in 2024. The Detroit Lions won the division at 15-2, getting themselves the #1 seed in the NFC, and they had an 8-0 record on the road. Absolute warriors. The Minnesota Vikings, kind of out of nowhere, 14-3 under Sam Darnold. They now moved to JJ McCarthy. The Packers, 11-6, and in the Eberflus administration, the Bears fell to 5-12. In 2025, I do think you could truthfully make a case for any one of these teams to win the division. And I know that that sounds crazy, but you can predict leaps, you can predict rosters to pan out, or you could just predict the Lions to still just be the Lions. We're going to talk about that today. If you love the NFL, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Let's talk some NFC North football. Finishing last in the NFC North with a record of 7-10, 12th seed in the NFC, I have the Green Bay Packers missing out on the playoffs. All right, so it's a pretty much guaranteed lock that Packers fans are going to be mad at me, but it was a guaranteed lock that one fan base out of this entire group was going to be mad at me. So I'm sorry that it had to be you, Packers fans, and if you want to save, bookmark this video, and when the Packers go 11-6 again this year and make the playoffs, you can come back and absolutely bust my balls. I'm completely fine with that. But I do have the Packers in this spot because I do think that they are the only team that did not vastly improve their roster. The NFC North is an absolute dogfight, and the Green Bay Packers just kind of stayed pat. When we look at the Packers' offensive side of the ball, we have to start with Jordan Love, who I have, no pun intended, a love-hate relationship with at this point, because I do think the peaks of Jordan Love are very high. The arm strength is there, the ability to make any throw. He's mobile enough, but the lows are there as well. Sometimes his decision making, I just wish he would live to play another down. And at his age, I'm just not sure if that development is going to come at any point in time. He has one of the best offensive minds in Matt LaFleur, and it still just quite hasn't been there. And the Packers do love taking a deep shot every once in a while. And I'm not saying that the offense shouldn't be dynamic, but what I am saying is that sometimes I think Jordan Love just presses too much. And in an NFC North and in a very competitive NFC, I do think there's going to be a lot of one-score games. And knowing that you're kind of baking in a turnover with this guy a game does hurt them in my eyes. Josh Jacobs was a free agent signing that came in and absolutely revolutionized the Green Bay Packers run game. There were some people that thought that they were crazy from going from Aaron Jones to Josh Jacobs, but I think Josh Jacobs showed you last year that that was the right choice. When Jordan Love went out and Malik Willis was the quarterback, this guy went out there and single-handedly won them a ton of football games. The wide receiver room is something that I think could really hold back the Packers depending on the development of first-round rookie wide receiver Matthew Golden. And Matthew Golden is a very interesting prospect because I do think that the high highs could be there, but I didn't have him as a true wide receiver 1. I felt like he was just a really high-end wide receiver 2 in a good offense. And it feels like the Green Bay Packers have a lot of those guys. Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson when he's healthy. But my big problem with the Packers is I don't feel like they have a true weapon in the passing game that Jordan Love could rely on in the big spots when they need a big play. You look around the league, the Lions, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Vikings, Justin Jefferson, the Eagles, A.J. Brown, the Rams, Puka Nacua. In the NFC, these teams that they are competing with have very high-level wide receiver 1s, and the Green Bay Packers don't have that. And I do think that that level of an elite playmaker and a big, dependable body that you could rely on in the passing situation does matter, especially for a quarterback like Jordan Love, who I don't think is quite as polished. I do think that for that reason, the Packers offense will struggle from times to keep up with these other offensive units. The offensive line is always going to be solid, and I love the tight end room of Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. But again, when I'm baking in a turnover a game and I don't know who your #1 target is late in the game that you can depend on, it does have me worried that the Packers offense won't be able to go toe-to-toe with some of the other better offenses in the NFC. The defense, though, does continue to be vastly underrated. Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, Quay Walker, Ajirian Cooper, Xavier McKinney. There are some really solid names. They lose Jair Alexander, bring in Nate Hobbs, but while Jair does have an all-pro ceiling, I'm not denying that. He just hadn't been healthy the past couple of years and seemed like he was a bit of a locker room issue. So I don't even hate them necessarily moving on from him and bringing in a Nate Hobbs. You have a Keyshawn Nixon, who I like as well. The Packers defense will continue to be a very solid unit for them. It's not going to be anything too flashy, but it's going to be a unit that gets the job done. Ultimately, like I said, in 2025, I bet against the Packers because I felt that the three other teams in their division got substantially better or were just already better than them in the case of the Detroit Lions. So, you know, I get it, Packers fans, if you see this prediction and you're like, my team's going to prove you wrong, it was a really tough choice to make. And no matter which team I picked here, I would have felt like no matter what, the other opposing fan base had a reason to tell me, yeah, my team could be better than yours. Because truthfully, if the Green Bay Packers went out and won the NFC North this year, it wouldn't be too surprising. But I had to plant my flag somewhere, and unfortunately for Packers fans, it has you guys at 7-10. Finishing third in the NFC North, earning themselves a playoff spot with a 10-7 record, I have the Chicago Bears. Yes, I am taking a leap of faith and ready to be heard again because I am betting on the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams to take that leap this year and be a playoff team. Now, I'm not going to go all the way into the deep end like some people that are going to pick them to win this division and come out of nowhere and do so or be a legit Super Bowl threat. But I do think that in year one of the Ben Johnson era, the Chicago Bears make the leap to being a playoff team because when you dive into the weeds, this roster is actually really, really solid. And with good coaching, the sky one day is the limit. Obviously, when you talk about the offense, we have to start with Caleb Williams, who, what is he? Because when you go back to what he was as a college prospect, the #1 overall pick, his NFL comp is Patrick Mahomes, you think this guy has got to be that guy. When you see his rookie year, you're like, this guy's kind of shit. And is it Caleb Williams or was it the coaching staff? I'm willing to place my money on that it was Matt Eberflus and Waldron and that staff. Caleb Williams had 2 offensive coordinators his rookie year. People were checked out. You saw DJ Moore not even wanting to play football at a certain point. The culture was clearly just all sorts of out of whack last year. I am willing to put that to the left and believe in Caleb Williams under Ben Johnson. And you could talk about whatever reports that you've seen coming out of training camp. That is what training camp is for, to get better. You look at the running back room, DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson, and rookie Kyle Monangai, and I think that you got a little bit of a solid running room here. Obviously, it's not the first degree of their offense. They are going to be a pass-first team. That is kind of what Ben Johnson wants this team to be, it seems, because he didn't bring in another running back, but I think that the running backs are a good enough spot to get it done. And when you look at the weapons that Caleb Williams is going to have, DJ Moore, second-year Roma Dunze, who was a top 10 pick, Luther Burden, who I do think is one of the most explosive players coming out of the draft, Cole Kmet, and Colston Loveland, that is 5 very solid pass-catching options. The Chicago Bears offense should be one of the most dynamic in football this year, especially when you consider that they have a top 10 offensive line in the sport. Ben Johnson planted his flag and said, no more shitty offensive lines in Chicago. We'll see what Braxton Jones is, but Joe Tooney, Drew Jolman, Jonah Jackson, completely revamped the middle of that offensive line. The interior offensive line looks fucking chef's kiss now. Darnell Wright as well. Like, this is a good offensive line in Chicago with good to elite weapons in terms of just totality. And if Caleb Williams can put together what we all know and think he could be, the sky's the limit for the Bears offense. This could be a top 10 to top 5 offensive unit in football in 2025. And the defense isn't half bad either. Montez Sweat, you bring in Grady Jarrett for that defensive line. Odiggy Bowe, like, it's a solid unit. Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards at your linebacker core. That creates a pretty solid front seven. You have Jalen Johnson in the secondary. If Jaquan Brisker could stay healthy, I think he's a really solid piece. Kevin Byard, and I know that he had that, just disaster on the Hail Mary last year, but Tyreek Stevenson is a good football player. There's a reason he's still a starter for the Bears after what happened there. Immature play, absolutely, but again, I think it speaks to the culture of the previous administration. Ben Johnson brought in Dennis Allen to be the defensive coordinator for this team, and while I think he was a terrible head coach, there's no denying Dennis Allen knows defense, and the Saints under him had some pretty good defenses. I expect the Bears to as well have a pretty good defense. And I'm not saying that there won't be learning struggles and that there won't be ups and downs throughout the season as this team is finding their identity. I'm sure there will be, but I think there's just enough talent here, the right amount of coaching staff, and I still believe in Caleb Williams enough to think that in a very competitive NFC, the Chicago Bears break through and get to the playoffs this year. And by 2026, we realistically could be talking about the Bears as legit Super Bowl contenders. Finishing second in this division, 6th overall in the NFC, back to the playoffs with an 11-6 record, I have the Detroit Lions. You can argue on paper that the Detroit Lions have the most talented roster in this division, and to be honest, I don't even know if I would disagree with you. From guys like Goff, Gibbs, Amon-Ra to Aiden Hutchinson, Brian Branch, Jack Campbell, like they are loaded on both sides of the ball. However, I do think, similar to what I talked about, the Bears are being a bit of an adjustment period and a learning curve. Losing both Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn is going to matter for this Detroit Lions team. Turning over not just one, but two great coordinators, having to replace them when you have a CEO head coach takes time. And I'm not saying the Lions can't do it. And I'm not saying Dan Campbell won't have these guys up ready to win. I still think that they're going to be an 11-win team, but I don't think that they're going to be as dominant as they were in 2024. Let's talk about the offense, though, because I do think that it still has all the potential to be a top 5 offense in football. Jared Goff continues to be one of the more underrated quarterbacks in football. I have him in my top 10. I think that Goff is, in the most complimentary way possible, Lions fans, an elite game manager. He's not mobile. He's not going to go create plays. If the play breaks down, you're probably SOL, but you want a guy to run a scheme, get the ball out where he needs to, read a defense, get through progressions. That is Jared Goff. You know, there's the reason that Lions fans got the Jared Goff chants going, because this guy has come to the franchise, completely turned it around, and last year you guys won 15 games behind this guy. So don't tell me Jared Goff isn't a winning quarterback. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery is the best running back duo in all of football. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is some level of a combination of Chris Johnson and LaDainian Tomlinson, and this guy is just so damn good, man. The speed that he has is unreal. I think he's a top 3 back in the sport. Amon-Ra St. Brown, it doesn't get more consistent out of the wide receiver position. Jameson Williams, is this the breakout year for JMO as the passing game coordinator becomes the offensive coordinator? It just might be, because Jameson Williams is that guy. Tim Patrick, you know, Isaac Tesla is your wide receiver 3. It's okay. You know, Sam Laporta, I love Laporta. I like Brock Wright. I think it's a solid tight end room. Laporta, maybe we can get those stats back up this year for my fantasy guys. The offensive line, Penei Sewell, you could argue is the best offensive line in football, and I wouldn't debate it with you. Losing Frank Ragnow and moving to either rookie Tate Ratledge or Graham Glasgow is going to be a transition for this Lions team. And I wonder if when you are up against some high-level interior defensive linemen, if the pressure becomes a little bit too much for Jared Goff in certain spots. That is a question mark, because like we mentioned, clean pocket, Jared Goff's elite. Not a clean pocket, it's up for debate. So the Lions offense does rely heavily on the offensive line, and I'm not saying that it's now a bad offensive line, but we do have to take that into account when we think about their ceiling as a team this year. The defense, man, one of the more underrated defenses in football, simply just because everybody died on the defense last year. They now looking healthy. Aiden Hutchinson, DJ Reader, you still have Davenport for whatever that's worth, Anzalone, Campbell, like a really, really solid front seven. Aleem McNeil as well once he's healthy. In that secondary, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, you could argue that that is the best safety duo in football. I know that Ravens fans will tell you it's Malachi Starks, Kyle Hamilton, and you'll get some debate elsewhere. But in terms of proven guys, Branch and Joseph, it doesn't get much better than that. DJ Reed, Terry and Arnold, Amik Robertson as your corners is a pretty solid set of guys. I do have my question marks on Terry and Arnold, if I'm being 100 with you guys. Like, I just don't know if he can cut down on the penalties this year and actually become a true corner one, or if that's going to be something that DJ Reed has to take over, because as a CB2, I don't think it gets much better than DJ Reed, but if he has to be the corner one for this team, there are a little bit of question marks there. But overall, Aiden Hutchinson was on a Defensive Player of the Year candidacy run last year, an absolute monster. And as long as he stays out there, this defense is probably going to be a top 16 unit in football. And ultimately, like I said, I think the Lions are still one of the most talented teams in the NFL. It's just a matter of how quickly do they put it together with all these new coordinators. Do they get off to a slower start to open up the season? I could certainly see that being the case. They are playing that first place schedule. That 15-2 season does get you a first place schedule, but don't get me wrong. When it comes time to the playoffs, we will have to consider the Detroit Lions Super Bowl contenders. And that does, of course, mean winning this division in 2025 at a 12-5 record. I have the Minnesota Vikings. Before we talk about JJ McCarthy and why I'm so heavily betting on the Minnesota Vikings, I want to remind you guys, if you love the NFL, to hit that subscribe button. Predictions videos like this, instant game reactions, tier lists, you name it, all your NFL content is here. Hit that sub button. Let's get back to the video. Am I out of my mind for betting on the Minnesota Vikings, who are now turning to a de facto rookie quarterback in JJ McCarthy to win a division that has Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love, Jared Goff and Dan Campbell, and a very exciting Bears team in it? Maybe, but I'm willing to take that risk because I think roster-wise, the Minnesota Vikings have a top 5 roster in all of football if you would put the quarterback position to the left. And we'll talk about that in just a second, but the Vikings' overall talent, the coaching of Kevin O'Connell, I think is enough to carry them to the playoffs, even if JJ McCarthy was to be just okay. But I think it's possible that JJ McCarthy is better than Sam Darnold. So when we talk about the offense, obviously we do have to start with JJ McCarthy, and I did just make the case that he could be better than Sam Darnold. And I want to explain that in the sense of I question how good Sam Darnold is versus how good the Vikings system is. I choose to believe that it is Kevin O'Connell, a top-tier offensive line, and those weapons. And as long as you have a good game manager in that spot, you can succeed and win football games. And that's kind of the spot that JJ McCarthy was in Michigan. Yes, there's going to be times where plays break down and JJ has to make a play. He's mobile. He's got good size, a good arm, and he's still just 22 years old, the youngest quarterback in the NFL, plenty of time to develop him as well. He's been developing a pretty solid chemistry with Jordan Addison, I've seen. There is just a ton of really solid weapons here for him to bounce off of and keep himself up. I do think that Kevin O'Connell is a quarterback guru. We've seen Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold have their best career years with this Minnesota Vikings team. I think JJ McCarthy will be just fine. And even if you wanted to argue with me that JJ McCarthy was going to be worse than Sam Darnold, the Vikings won 14 games last year. How much worse does he have to be when the rest of the roster around him actually got better from what Sam Darnold had last year to not win 11, 12 games? Just some food for thought there. You look at the running back room, you still have Aaron Jones, who was an NFL top 100 player this year. He's getting up there in age, but that's why they brought in Jordan Mason, who I think is a really solid complementary back to Aaron Jones. This rushing attack is going to make the offense even more two-dimensional than it was last year. And for a de facto rookie quarterback in JJ McCarthy, I think that's great. Justin Jefferson is obviously no doubt a top 2 wide receiver in football. And if you're a Vikings fan calling him 1, I completely get it. Jordan Addison suspended the first 3 games, but when he comes back, we know how dynamic he could be. Jalen Naylor and Ty Felton, I think, are really solid 3 and 4 options at the receiver position as well. TJ Hawkinson will be coming into this year fully healthy. And when you look at that offensive line, man, Darisaw, Jackson, Kelly, Fries, O'Neal, that is a top 5 offensive line in football. All the pieces around JJ McCarthy are top 10 to top 5 in terms of the room. Even if he's just mid, this is going to be a top 15 offense in 2025. And then we look at the defense, man, and the defense got even better, and Brian Flores is going to have a field day with this unit. On the defensive line, you have Jonathan Grenard, Dallas Turner, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. That is disgusting. That may be the best defensive line front in the NFL. I'm not bullshitting. Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace, Andrew Van Ginkel. That is a top 5 to 10 linebacker room in football. Van Ginkel is a top 100 player in football. Now, the secondary. This is the weaker part of the team, but it's still solid. Byron Murphy Jr., Isaiah Rodgers, Harrison Smith, who I don't know if this guy's is ever going to age. And then you have Mekhi Blackman and Joshua Metellus, who we'll see how those guys go. You lose Bynum, which sucks, but I think with how strong that front seven is going to be, you have a good enough secondary for a really, really solid defense. Flores is going to run those exotic fire zone blitzes, and at the end of the day, he is going to stifle opposing quarterbacks. Look at what he did to open the year last year. You know Flores is in that kitchen absolutely cooking up some gas for that defense, and we get to see Flores' defense versus Johnson's offense for the Bears in week 1. I can't wait. I can't wait. But yeah, I am betting on the Minnesota Vikings. I am stamping my flag. I am going out there and making what I would say is a spicy prediction in the NFC North. But when I look at the roster, it is the best in the division, excluding the quarterback position. And when I look at the quarterback, do I believe he could just be a game manager? Yes. And with that, I think the Minnesota Vikings have the least amount of variance from last year. They play a second place schedule. There isn't going to be, as many question marks as there is at coordinator for the Detroit Lions. I think they're more dynamic than the Bears and the Packers. And I think they have the best defense in the division. That's where I landed on Minnesota winning the NFC North in 2025. To recap, the Minnesota Vikings win this division at 12-5, making the playoffs. The Lions finish in second at 11-6, making the playoffs. And the Bears finish in third, 10-7, making the playoffs. And then the Packers, 7-10, missing out on the playoffs in 2025. I understand the NFC North is one of the tougher divisions to predict, and I understand that I went out on a limb with my prediction of the Vikings winning. You think I'm right? Let me know in the comment section. If you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comment section. If you love the NFL, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. I will catch you guys next time. Peace.